Let's face it, semicolons are one of those punctuation marks that many people get through their entire lives without learning how to use. And that's because you encounter them so infrequently that they're often the butt end of jokes. Like in this clip from Last Week Tonight.
You don't even have to understand it, just use it. Their pitch for a major money app was basically the same as the attitude that we all have towards semicolons. You're never 100% using one of those, are you? It's a real go-with-God punctuation.
Now that may be true, but even if you're unlikely to encounter semicolons in everyday life, you will certainly encounter them on the digital SAT. So unless you want to go with God on the test, I recommend watching the rest of this video. Hello, I'm Nathan Greenberg, founder of Ivy League Mentors, and I've been teaching SAT since before many of you were even born. And today I'm going to tell you everything you need to know about semicolons on the SAT.
Mr. Greenberg! Mr. Greenberg!
What is it, student me?
My other teacher told me that a semicolon just equals a period.
Unfortunately, student me, it's not that simple. You see, while that little trick may work in many situations, there are actually two usages of semicolons that you will need to understand if you want to do well on the test. But since you already mentioned it, let's start off with the first one. Semicolons as a replacement for periods. Now, theoretically, when a semicolon is serving as a period, you're supposed to have some kind of logical link between the two parts of the sentence. Like, you wouldn't be connecting two completely unrelated ideas of the semicolon. However, on the test, that doesn't really factor into your decision making. So what you need to be doing is rather considering the grammar of the sentence. Do we have a complete sentence on both sides of the punctuation mark? Now, in order to do that, you need to first be able to distinguish between a complete sentence and a fragment.
That's easy. I mean, if a sentence isn't complete, won't it just sound wrong?
Well, student me, that actually may work out for you, especially if you already have a strong natural sense of English grammar. However, if you are struggling to determine the difference between sentences and fragments with your ears alone, you might want to brush up on your grammar rules. I don't have the time to go into detail on this in this video, but I do have a handout that explains this on my website, Ivy League Mentors Prep. I'll leave a link in the description. One other point that I should add is that the College Board does not like you to begin a sentence with a coordinating conjunction, even though it's deemed perfectly acceptable by most style guides.
Mr. Greenberg!
Yes, student me?
A coordinating what?
That's right, I forgot. Student me doesn't speak grammar. Well, if you don't know what a coordinating conjunction is, you can just remember fanboys. That's an acronym that stands for for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. Essentially, the College Board doesn't want you to begin a sentence with one of those words. And since a semicolon can replace a period, you also wouldn't want to put one of those after a semicolon, at least with this usage. So now that we know the rule, let's take a look at an example together. Now, we should know just from looking at the answer choices that this is going to be a punctuation question, because the only thing that's different is the punctuation. We also see that we have a semicolon in answer A, and so one of the first things that we might try to test is the rule that we just discussed. Do we have a complete sentence on both sides of the punctuation? Let's take a look at the first half of the sentence. Beatrix Potter is perhaps best known for writing and illustrating children's books, such as The Tale of Peter Rabbit, but she also dedicated herself to mycology, the study of fungi. Now, hopefully your ears are telling you that this is a complete sentence. It has everything that we need, a subject, a conjugated verb, and there's nothing that makes it incomplete, which means we move on to the second half of the sentence. Producing more than 350 paintings of the fungal species she observed in nature and submitting her research on spore germination to the Linnaean Society of London. Now, hopefully your ears are telling you that we don't have a complete sentence here. If you want to get technical, it's because we don't have a fully conjugated verb, which means that the thing after the sentence is just a fragment. And that means that we can't use a semicolon in this situation, so we can cross off answer A. Now, to answer the rest of this question, there still is a little bit you need to know, but let's take a look at answer B. What do we see there? Oh, a period. And since we don't have a complete sentence on both sides of the punctuation, we also can't use a period, and so we can cross off answer B as well. One of the interesting implications of this rule is that I probably could have told you that answer A and B were both going to be wrong without even looking at the text. That's because you can't have two correct answers on the SAT, and since in most cases a period equals a semicolon, if A were correct, B would also have to be correct, and so the only way that can be resolved is if they're both wrong. Now, to determine whether the correct answer is going to be C or D, you also need to know your comma rules. That's a topic that I also don't have the time to get into on this video, but I do have a handout on the topic, and I will leave a link for that in the description as well. However, to get through it quickly right now, I can tell you that the phrase, "the study of fungi," is in a positive that describes mycology. That means it's non-essential, and what we need to do when we see one of these non-essential phrases is to surround it with commas. Note that we have a comma before the phrase, between the words mycology and the, and we also need a comma on the other side of the phrase. That means that answer D, which provides this comma, is going to be the correct one. Now let's move on to another example. Again, we know that this is going to be a punctuation question by looking at the answer choices. We see that the only difference between them is punctuation. So let's test out this rule by looking at the first and second halves of the sentence and seeing if they are complete sentences on their own. To humans, it does not appear that the golden orb weaver spider uses camouflage to capture its prey. Now hopefully your ears are telling you that this is indeed a complete sentence. It has everything that it needs to stand on its own. Let's look at the second half of the sentence. Rather, the brightly colored arachnid seems to wait conspicuously in the center of its large circular web for insects to approach. Again, hopefully your ears are telling you that we do have a complete sentence here as well, which means this is a situation where we could be separating the halves with a semicolon. Now looking at our answer choices, there are two answers that involve semicolons, C and D. But as we know, the word rather should be part of the second one because it's indicating contrast with the first. This means that the correct answer to the question is going to be D. So now that we've mastered the first semicolon usage, let's move on to the second one, in which a semicolon definitely does not equal a period. Use semicolons to separate items in a complex list.
Mr. Greenberg, Mr. Greenberg!
Yes, student Ming?
I have absolutely no idea what you're talking about.
Fair enough, that does sound a bit confusing, but it's easy enough to understand if we take a look at a very simple example together. On my trip, I visited London, Paris, and Madrid. Now, how many places did I visit?
3.
Right, and because we have a list of 3 or more items, we need to separate them with commas, because that's how you punctuate lists. But what happens if the items on the list contain commas of their own? We can see that in a variation on the same sentence. On my trip, I visited London, England, Paris, France, and Madrid, Spain. Now, how many places did I visit?
Obviously still 3.
Right. But see what happens if we put commas between those 3 items as we did before? Now it looks like we have 6 places when in fact there are just 3. It's comma madness. That's because there's no way to distinguish between the comma separating items in the list from the comma separating cities from their respective countries. Now the way English resolves this problem is by replacing the commas separating the items in the list with semicolons, and that's what you may have to do on the test. So now that you understand the concept, let's look at an example from the real SAT together. Again, we can tell that this is going to be a punctuation question by looking at the answer choices. The punctuation is the only thing that changes. So let's read the sentence and try to break things down. Joshua Hinson, director of the Language Revitalization Program of the Chickasaw Nation in Oklahoma, helped produce the world's first indigenous language instructional app, Chickasaw Basic, in 2009, an online television network, Chickasaw TV, in 2010, and a Rosetta Stone language course in Chickasaw in 2015. Now, the way I've read this sentence should make it clear that there are 3 items in this list, and traditionally we would separate the items with commas. But as you can see, that's not going to work out here because some of the items in this list have commas of their own. So following the rule that we just discussed, what we need to do is to use semicolons to separate the main items in this list. In fact, you can see that they've already put a semicolon after 2010. That's another indication that this is the usage we are trying to talk about, because we definitely don't have a full sentence after that semicolon. Now, once we've identified that this is a complex list that needs to be separated with semicolons, another matter we need to consider is parallelism. Note that there are 3 items on this list. There are also 3 dates, and so the only way this would make sense is for each item to have 1 date in it. That means that the first semicolon needs to come after the first date, and the only answer that gives us that option is answer C. So there you have it, everything that you need to know to use semicolons confidently and correctly on the test. I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks again for watching.